They say a woman can wait a lifetime in one spot and still not be seen. Dorothea Whitley sat on that old wooden crate for 3 days, wind pulling at the hem of her worn traveling dress, rain spotting the page of the letter she kept folded in her lap like a prayer someone forgot to answer. Her ticket had been one way, her hope a fragile thing tucked inside her coat pocket next to a half-used comb and a tin of cold biscuits. She had been promised a man, not a prince, not a saint, just a man who needed a wife, and maybe if kindness had room, someone who'd see her not as used up or too old to bloom, but simply enough. But no one came. The townsfolk passed her by like a ghost. Some stared, some looked away. And when the second night fell and the station master offered her a corner of the platform to sleep, she whispered a thank you so small it got lost in the wind. But here's what no one, not even Dorothea, knew miles away through dust and storm and broken wagon wheels he was riding hard. Not for money, not for duty, but for her. Because years ago, Clay Hendrickson had made a mistake. A mistake that cost him more than love, it cost him time. And when he saw her name again on that registry, scribbled in trembling handwriting, he didn't hesitate. What happens when the person who never arrived arrives too late? And what if love comes not with flowers or vows, but with mud-caked boots apology in the eyes and a second chance held gently in calloused hands? This isn't just a story about a bride left waiting. It's about what happens when the waiting ends. When dignity stays even after rejection. When two people older, quieter, slower to trust, decide that home isn't something you're given, it's something you build together. So stay with us. You've heard the silence of her wait. Now come hear what he says when he finally arrives. Would you want to see what happens when he finds her? What he says and whether she'll choose to believe again? Because the West wasn't built on guns and gold alone. Sometimes, and it was built on hearts that kept hoping. Tap the video. Her story is just beginning. No one asked her name when she stepped off the train in Iron Tree. The locomotive let out a long screech, dragging coal smoke and metal fatigue through the dry afternoon. A woman in a worn brown dress clutched a hand-stitched bag to her chest. Tucked beneath her arm was a crumpled letter, its ink faded and bled, like dreams left too long in the rain. Her name was Dorothea Lind, 51 years old with streaks of gray in hair that once glowed like honey. At an age when most women had grandchildren on their laps and soup bubbling on the stove, Dorothea sat alone on a splintered crate in a town that hadn't been expecting her. The man who had promised marriage through letters was gone like so many men before. A father too stern to speak kindness, a husband who lasted just 4 winters a shopkeeper who paid her in scorn more than silver. Guess he changed his mind, the train conductor said, not bothering to meet her eyes. These mail-order brides get left behind all the time. Dorothea didn't answer. She simply smiled faintly, turning her face to the scorched sky. There were no tears. Not anymore. By this age, she had learned how to carry her dignity like a hem in the wind, deliberate, proud, and quiet. From far down the dusty road came the faint echo of hooves. But Dorothea did not look up. All her life, no one had come back. But this time might be different. Clay McCall didn't much believe in fate. He believed in fences that broke down during storms and cattle that strayed just as you were sitting to supper, and in the kind of work that didn't let a man sleep through the night. But he didn't believe in signs until he saw her. He hadn't planned to pass through Iron Tree. He was headed east from the high ridges, trailing 3 skittish calves he'd bought cheap, and a wagon axle that groaned with every turn. The town was just a watering stop, a place to buy tobacco and grit his teeth through small talk. But then he saw her, a woman on a crate, still as a church pew, her hands folded like she'd been waiting for a prayer to come down from the sky. Something in her posture made him pause. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was something quieter, a kind of surrender that had already forgiven the world for being cruel. He approached slowly, hat in hand. "Ma'am," he said, voice rough from dust and road. "You waitin' for someone?" Dorothea blinked once, as if surfacing from deep water. "I suppose I was," she said with a smile so gentle it almost broke him. But the train came and went. Seems it was no one after all. Clay looked at the letter folded in her lap, worn thin at the creases. He didn't know her story, not yet, but something told him it was the kind of story he'd want to finish. Town's not much, he said, but I know a place that's got coffee and quiet if you'd allow me to sit a spell. Dorothea studied him, his weathered face, the way his boots sank slightly into the earth, like he'd never quite belonged to comfort. And then slowly she nodded. I've been alone a long while, she whispered. Clay tipped his hat. Well, ma'am, maybe it's time you weren't. But can two strangers, broken by different storms, find shelter in each other? The coffee wasn't strong, but it was hot. Clay poured it himself, hands rough around the pot, careful not to spill. They sat beneath a cracked wooden awning outside the feed store, watching the wind pull dust in lazy swirls through the street. Dorothea didn't speak much, not at first. She held the cup with both hands like it might warm more than just her fingers. Clay didn't push. He'd learned long ago that silence has its own language, one older than words spoken in the way someone glances down instead of up, or breathes slower when they're trying not to remember. But by the time the second cup cooled in their hands, she'd unfolded the letter. It said his name was Matthew, said he was 38, had a ranch near Clearwater, and was tired of cold suppers and talking to horses. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Said he'd send for me if I could bake biscuits and didn't mind quiet. And did you, Clay asked gently. Bake, she looked at him, then back at the paper. Yes, and I didn't mind quiet. I minded waiting. Her voice softened. 3 weeks ago, this letter arrived with a train ticket. But when I stepped off, no Matthew, just the conductor telling me the platform was closing. Clay rubbed the back of his neck. You think he changed his mind? She folded the letter carefully like it was sacred, or never meant it at all. They sat in quiet again, not uncomfortable, just thick like air before a storm. Clay wanted to ask more why she hadn't gone home where her people were, what she was really running from, but something in her posture warned him. People who sit on crates for hours don't do it because they have nowhere to go. They do it because they've already gone too far. I'm sorry, he said finally. She blinked. For what? For the kind of world that lets a woman wait like that. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. I've been waiting my whole life, Mr. McCall. This isn't the first time I was forgotten. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of dry grass and old timber. He looked at her, then really looked at the fine lines etched like soft maps across her cheeks, the tired grace in her voice, and the dignity in how she held her chin, just high enough to still be proud. Maybe it wasn't a question of what she'd been through. Maybe the real question was, why had he been the one to find her? What if the stranger she waited for wasn't the man who sent the letter, but the one who stopped to ask? It wasn't a proposal. Not really. Clay McCall didn't talk like a man who rushed things. He simply turned his hat once in his hands and said, I've got room at my place. It ain't much. 1 dog, 2 goats, and a stovepipe that rattles in the wind. But if you need a roof, it's yours. And Dorothea, who once sat on a crate waiting for a man who never came, nodded like she'd just been handed a map home. The ride to his ranch was quiet except for the rhythmic creak of leather and the occasional snort from Clay's old mare. Dorothea didn't ask questions. Clay didn't offer stories. But every mile stretched a little more space between her and the station bench. His place sat low against a hill with a crooked porch and a fence made of mismatched boards. The windows glowed orange in the dusk like they were holding in something tender. Maybe hope. Maybe something like it. Goats are mostly polite, Clay said as they approached, but the dog thinks he owns the place. He wasn't lying. The dog barked once, then leaned all 100 pounds of himself against Dorothea's leg, like he'd been waiting years to meet her. She knelt instinctively, rubbing behind his ears. He doesn't usually take to folks, Clay said, watching her. She smiled softly. Maybe I don't usually take to folks either. That night, Clay lit the stove, while Dorothea found mismatched dishes in a cabinet too tall for her. They made eggs and beans and cut a biscuit in half between them. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and no one was left sitting outside. After supper, she asked if she could wash the dishes. He didn't stop her. And when she stood at the small window, drying her hands with a frayed towel, she stared into the dark like she was trying to find the girl she used to be, before the crate, before the station, before the world told her she was forgettable. You don't have to stay, Clay said from behind, her voice low, just because someone else didn't show. Dorothea turned the lamplight, making her eyes look like honey. I know, she said, but I'd like to stay because you did. And just like that, the waiting was over. What happens when the woman once left behind starts building something all her own? The days pass like soft river wind, quiet, steady, full of little kindnesses. Clay didn't press Dorothea with questions, and she never asked about the graves behind the barn. They each had a past. They each had rooms in their hearts where the door stayed shut. But then in early spring, a letter arrived. It came tucked under the saddle blanket one morning. No postmark, no seal, just her name in a scrawl she hadn't seen in 7 years. Dorothea stood at the corral fence, the goats milling at her heels when she opened it. Dot, I reckon you heard what happened by now. I wasn't right. I see that now. But a man gets older, he sees what he left behind. If you're still out west, maybe we could try again. Royce, the man who'd ordered her from the agency, then never claimed her at the station, the man who decided she wasn't what he'd expected after seeing one faded photograph. Now he wanted to try again. Dorothea folded the letter in four, tight and slow, and held it until her knuckles went white. Clay didn't ask what it said, but he saw the way she wiped her eyes without letting the tears fall. Later that night, while tending the fire, Clay finally spoke. You don't owe me anything, Miss Dorothea. If someone's coming for you, someone you used to know, I understand if... She cut him off gently. I waited for Royce once. I sat on that crate 3 days. He never came. Now he sends a letter like a man calling back a dog. She turned, meeting Clay's eyes. I am not a second chance, Clay. I'm someone who got better after being forgotten. His shoulders softened, but his jaw stayed set. Then I hope you don't mind me saying, I think you're worth being chosen first. Dorothea didn't reply, not with words. She just reached out and rested her hand over his on the armrest. Two people weathered by life finally daring to be chosen. But the past has long arms, and not everyone lets go so easy. What happens when the man who once abandoned her comes looking in person? Will she have the strength to face what nearly broke her? The morning Royce came. The sky was low and white heavy with unfallen snow. Dorothea had just finished laying out winter feed when she heard the hooves. One rider, no wagon, no gear. Just a man in a long coat and town boots, too polished for this land. She didn't need to see his face to know. Royce dismounted with a quiet confidence, the same sort that once made young girls lean forward on church benches. His face was thinner now. Lines creased his forehead like dried creek beds, and his eyes, once charming, now searched the yard like he was trying to reclaim something he'd lost. Dorothea, he said softly. Clay came from the barn with a hay hook still in hand. He didn't speak, just stood beside her, like a tree might solid, unmoving. Royce smiled faintly, glancing at Clay. You've done all right for yourself. Dorothea's voice, when it came, was low and clear. Why are you here, Royce? I came to say what I should have said at the station. I was scared. Foolish. You deserve better. She studied him for a long moment. You're right. I did. He nodded, almost relieved to be blamed. I figured maybe if you weren't already settled, we could start again. I got land now. Steady work. No more running. Behind her, Clay didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He didn't interrupt. Because love that's real doesn't compete. It waits to be chosen. Dorothea stepped forward slowly. I waited for you in a town where I had no name. I was called the woman left on the crate. Do you know what that does to someone? I do now, Royce murmured. I learned to survive because you didn't come. I learned to belong because someone else showed up when you didn't. So no, I won't start again. I already have. Royce's pride, or what was left of it, crumbled like ice in sunlight. He looked between her and Clay, nodded once, and turned away. As he rode off, Dorothea's knees nearly gave, but Clay was there, strong, gentle, silent. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she whispered, I needed to see him one last time. Not for closure, but to be certain. Clay tucked her hand into his. Certain of what? That I'm not the woman on the crate anymore. But can healing truly last when old wounds run deep? And what happens when love is given freely, not to fill a hole, but to build something whole? Winter came harder that year. The wind howled like a lonely dog through the bare cottonwoods, and the sky stayed gray for weeks at a time. But inside the little homestead Clay had built from timber and prayer, the cold never quite reached her bones anymore. Dorothea moved like she belonged now. She laughed more easily, low and warm, like firewood crackling. She began humming again while cooking, not because anyone asked her to, but because her soul had room now for melody. The children, those not born of her, but bonded by something deeper, had begun calling her Ma when they thought she wasn't listening. She never corrected them. One morning, while shaping dough on the kitchen table, Clay came in from the barn brushing snow from his shoulders. He paused in the doorway, looking at her the way a man might look at the first bloom in April. "What?" she asked, smiling faintly. "I was thinking, I don't know if I ever properly proposed." Dorothea's hands stopped kneading. Her heart didn't race like a young girl's might. It did something gentler, it settled. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know, but I want to." He walked over and opened his hand. In his palm was a simple silver ring, worn a little nicked, clearly once loved. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "She was a quiet woman, knew how to hold a family together with silence and kindness. I think she'd have liked you." Dorothea took the ring. It was warm from his skin. "I'm not young," she said softly. "I never needed young Clay," replied. "I needed true." She slipped the ring onto her finger. Outside, the wind eased. Inside, the warmth lingered. Because love doesn't always arrive in springtime or youth. Sometimes it walks in the door at 50, carrying firewood and asking nothing in return. And maybe that's what home really is, not a place you're taken to, but a place you choose together. Would you like to see what comes next for Dorothea and Clay, or hear more stories like theirs? Sometimes we think we've been forgotten, left on the platform of life with nothing but a letter and an aching heart. But then someone arrives, not to rescue us, but to see us as we are. Not younger, not different, just worthy of being chosen. Dorothea didn't get the story she expected, but she got something better. A man who came back not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And Clay, weathered by time, softened by regret, found that the woman he'd once let slip away had grown into something unshakably beautiful. Quiet, strong, still waiting, but not broken. This story reminds us it's never too late to choose kindness, never too late to believe in love again, and never too late to become the kind of person who waits with dignity. If this tale stirred something in you, a memory, a hope, a tear, you're not alone. That's why we tell these stories. For hearts that still believe, for those who've waited, and for those brave enough to arrive anyway. We'd love to hear from you. Do you want to see what comes next for Dorothea and Clay? Would you like more stories like this of second chances, quiet love, and late blooming joy? Please subscribe to None, Wild West Saga. Share this story with someone who needs it and leave a comment below. We're listening. We always will be.